Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Mind-Boggling Concepts in the Torah. Just as per usual, don't get too close to the microphone. We don't want to spread any of those diseases, and make sure you put down any sharp objects. We can get kind of heated around here. So actually, we are on day 7 of the 7 days of creation, chapter 2, verse 1. You see it there? Last week we did the last day, we did Adam and the purpose of life. Just in case you missed it, go check out our YouTube channel and you'll see it there. And now we're up to chapter 2, verse 1, which is Shabbat. Now, chapter 2, verse 1 already should be sparking, I don't know, what's the right description here, but that should already, create a lot of controversy. What is chapter 2, verse 1 doing in the middle of the first 7 days of creation? In other words, chapter 2, verse 1 should be what is in our Chumash, in our Torah, chapter 2, verse 4. Eila Todos Hashemayim va'aretz. Now, as we all know, the Sefer Torah, which was for thousands of years the way we read Torah, was there's no chapters and verses. There's no numbering system. So a Christian came along and put a numbering system. And because that's how Christians write their books. And the first book they printed was a Bible, was a Torah. Now, there's a meaningful reason why they did that. It's sort of like in the beginning days of television. What were the first programs? They were radio shows that they put on TV, because you have a TV now and you have to show pictures. What are you going to show pictures of? Dandelions? They should have, but they didn't. So they just took the previous medium and expanded it out in the same way that the early internet used newspapers. What was the medium? So here they come along, they invent the printing press, and what are they going to print? Well, as Rav Yaakov Weinberg points out, most of the world's illiterate. So they're going to print books. Who are they going to print books for? First of all, what book they're going to print? The one is, which is the most popular book in the world, still is, the Bible. And who are they going to print it for? The Jews. Now, the truth of the matter is it was a big disaster, financial disaster, because the Jews already had the books. It was up until that point, all books were handwritten. So you had a Chumash, and Jews had their Chumashim, they had their Torahs, the ones that they had in the home, and they were very expensive, but you had to have one. So they already had them, and they took care of them to make sure that they didn't fall into disrepair. They're not like how we treat books today. So it took a long time to cycle out, and then when you needed a new book, you picked up a printed book. And because the Christians printed the Bible with chapters and verses, that's how we got chapters and verses. And it wasn't like so print, have a Jewish printing house print up a Bible. It was a very regulated industry. If you go back, you'll see a lot of the books for this period have stamps in the cover, because the Gentiles had censors, and you couldn't print anything you wanted. It's not like free press that you have today. That concept did not exist. I mean, or put it differently, the reason why it was such a big deal when America came out and said one of the principles of a society is a free press is because that was not in existence prior. So you just couldn't print your own Bible. Plus, commercially, there was a lot of interests. There was a lot of investment that went into making printing presses in those days. It was all hand typed. The machines were very expensive. So they had a lot of interest in protecting their industries and protecting their earnings. So a lot of the chapters and verses, a lot of them fit within the context or the meaning of what it's talking about. Some of them are just completely random. Like there's some chapters that they just, okay, we got to put a chapter here. You can't keep going on like this. So they put a chapter in the middle that has no meaning whatsoever. And some of the breaks are understandably correct. Like you'll see a lot of the parshas start with a new chapter. So not always, but most of the parshas start with a new chapter. But sometimes some of the breaks are to emphasize Christian philosophy. And this is the classic. Because when does Shabbat start? When does the story of Shabbat in the Chumash start? Chapter 2, verse 1. Because they wanted to emphasize or give a sense that their Shabbat, their Sabbath, was legitimate. Because as we all know, their Sabbath occurs on the first day of the week, Sunday. Sunday is the first day of the week. Now, what's phenomenal is, let's go back a little bit. If you go out into the big wide world and you go back historically over thousands of years, you'll find that every culture had a 7-day week. Right? Every culture had a 365-day year. It may have been 66, it may have been 64, but approximately they had 360, because you didn't need to be any genius to realize, oh, it's spring again, right? The fall is happening, winter's coming, right? You know, in an agrarian society, you needed to keep track of when things are happening and the cycle, and count the days between one cycle to the other, and you're going to come up with approximately 365 days, give or take, right? You don't be a genius. Every society has a 365-day calendar, give or take, right? You don't have to be a genius to come up with a month, right? You look out in the sky and you see, oh, look, there's a new moon. You just count again, and you're going to get 29, 30 days approximately, right? Because it's not an exact number, right? Well, but similarly, every culture in the world has a 7-day week. There is no society that has an 8-day week, a 10-day week, a 5-day week. Right? Where does this 7-day week come from? There is no natural cycle in the universe that's a 7-day week. Where did they get the 7-day week from?
From here.
No, it predates here. This book is approximately 3,500 years old. They were keeping 7-day weeks before that. So where does the 7-day week come from?
From Shabbat.
That's true. But I think what you're trying to say is, which is you're right, which is from Adam, from the first man. Adam had a 7-day week, right? He taught his children 7-day week. They taught their children, and said the history of the universe is that the world was created in 7 days, and people respected that forever. They always kept a 7-day week. Right, you follow?
Yeah.
Now, what is the reason that the Christians make it on Sunday? Now, what's interesting is about this 7-day week business is you can make day one any day of the week you want, as long as we have if you have two cultures that are next to each other, and one keeps like half of Kansas City goes according to one time frame. You know, the America's broken up into different time zones. So there's a break right down the middle of Kansas City. I don't know how they manage. And I'd love to find out. Right, what do they do? I'll meet you at 2 o'clock. My 2 o'clock or your 2 o'clock? Right, who do they go by? Is that, I mean, in the airlines, I used to learn with a pilot, they have a standard by when they give the time, do they mean the time of the departing time, or the airline needs to know what time they're going by? So there's a rule for it. I forget what it is, but there's a rule that everybody knows. Now, what happened was, it's very interesting, is the railroads organized the time, because what would happen is no one needed to know what time it was in New York. You didn't, it wasn't relevant. If you're living in the middle of Mississippi, you don't need to know what time it is in New York. You knew what time it was in Mississippi because you saw the sun at noon and you worked it out from there, right? They had clocks and they worked out their time, but it was all local time. The railroads changed that because the railroad would say, the train is going to arrive at 2:00. Whose 2:00 are you talking about? Right? From where the train came from in New York or where the train's going to in Los Angeles. Right? So they printed, in the early days, they printed schedules with two time frames, the local time and the time from the departure time, from where they departed. And that became too cumbersome. And eventually, America got a standardized time frame, right? And we've got these different time zones. And it's very confusing if you're talking to someone in a different time zone, right? I had this problem. I was interviewing for a job, actually, in Hong Kong. And I was getting the time mixed up because it's a completely different day. So they would say, I'll talk to you at 7:00. And I knew 7:00 meant whatever it was in my time, which is completely different. I forget them at the break. But I kept getting mixed up. Was it a day ahead or was it a day behind? It was finally, it just wasn't for me. Didn't work out. They weren't interested either, so it was perfect.
Thank God you didn't work out.
So where were we? So you have to be on the same time for it to work. But how do you do it? But we're 7-day week. As long as we all keep a 7-day week, it doesn't really matter what day of the week you call it. Like in Israel, they call Sunday day Yom Rishon, but in America they call it Sunday. You can call it anything you want, as long as we have a 7-day week. Because I'll meet you next week, right? Well, if it could be an 8-day week, that's going to be very, very confusing. Right. So, for instance, when they had the rover working on Mars, I think they still do it, is they have to have teams. It has to be monitored 24/7 because just the mechanics and the design, whatever it is, they have to have. So they broke it up into, I think it was 3 teams that were monitoring it 24/7. The problem is the Mars doesn't have a 24-hour day. It's I believe a little longer, like something like 25 hours. I forget exactly. So the teams, there are 3 teams, but the time frame was moving because it was adding a little time every day, right? So they would have to wake up according to their zone. So sometimes it was in the middle of the day, sometimes in the middle of the night, right? And it was very difficult to live on Martian time. It was not an easy thing to do. It messed them up tremendously. So there's a long introduction to why the Christians made their Sabbath on day number 1. It was very strange. Why didn't they make their Sabbath? And we all have the same numbering system. Day number 1 for the Christians is the same as day number 1 for the Jews. Our 7th day is Friday night, Saturday, and their 7th day is Saturday. Right, which is the same, basically. So why do they make their Sabbath on day number 1? So there's a famous story by the rabbis that was passed down and explains the meaning behind it. To the Romans were 7-day week people. In the ancient world, they didn't have a weekend. There was no such thing as a weekend, a day off. There's no such thing. Right, you worked till you dropped. Right, that was the philosophy, and the Romans took that to perfection. Right, so when they met the Jews, they were like, "You guys are lazy. You take off 1 day a week. It's crazy." Right, and the Jews replied to them, "No, you don't understand. If you take off 1 day a week, you'll get more out of your workers." than if you work 7 days straight. Right? So the Romans tested it. Is that true? And they had a control group, and then they had the experimental group, right? One group worked 7 days a week, and the other group got 1 day off a week, right? And it was true that the group that took the 1 day off a week got more done than the one that worked 7 days straight. And that's why they implemented 1 day off a week. Right, when it became the Holy Roman Empire, so then they adopted it as their Sabbath, and they kept the same day, and they kept it the same number of the week, day number 1. Right? Why? Because the story is explaining it to you. You see, the truth of the matter is the Jews didn't tell them the real truth behind the meaning of why you take off 1 day a week. See, because the Romans were only interested in increasing their productivity. So we said to them, if you want to increase your productivity, take off 1 day a week. Which day of the week are you going to take off? The first day, because you're resting so that you can work. And I remember actually growing up, in America they called it blue laws. In England they called it something different. I forget what they called it. But it was sacrosanct. Sunday was a day you couldn't do anything. There was hard, which as a kid I thought was just very strange, because there were stores you could buy certain kinds of things, like same in America. You could buy milk, you could buy pharmaceuticals, you could buy a few odds and ends, right? But everything else was closed, and it was just like, why? And it was illegal to open up your store on Sunday, right? And they took it seriously. Right, and the reason is because the father, which is typically it was one person working in the house, right? Mothers didn't work typically, and the whole purpose of it was so that dad could have 1 day off a week to recoup, and that was the idea behind it, and it was spoken about. Right, leave dad because he needs a day just to kind of put it all together. Right, well, after the Second World War, I mean, in my day, it was already starting to fall apart. I don't know what was the thing that made it crack, but eventually it all opened up, and now you can do anything on Sunday that you can do on Wednesday. There's no limitation. I don't know what was the causation of it, but nevertheless, that's what eventually happened. But the truth of the matter is, that is not the meaning of the Sabbath. You don't rest so you can work, right? But the reason they put it on day number 1 is for that reason. And the reason they put chapter 2, verse 1 here is to sort of give it some legitimacy. But the reality is, Sabbath comes at the end of the week. You work so you can rest, right? That's the meaning, right? The whole meaning of Shabbat is the purpose of life, not a means to something else. Shabbos is not the means. Shabbos is the ends.
Right.
Right? Now, what do you do on Shabbos, right? That represents that, right? The experience is that, right? So we have this service that Mark used to talk about. We have this service on Saturday night called Havdalah. Just like, and so we say in that prayer, just like there's a difference between day and night, there's a difference between the Sabbath and the rest of the week. So if someone comes to you and says to you, what's the difference between day and night? What would you tell them?
Light.
If they're not looking, if they've got dark sun, or they're blindfolded, or they're blind, what would you say?
Cold and hot.
Sometimes, right? But that's not a very good indicator always, especially in this weather when it's really cold. When it's in the summer, you could tell, but in the winter, not necessarily.
Activity and Silence.
Yeah, a little bit, right? But the truth of the matter is, as Noel will explain, you have to see it.
Huh.
Well, you might be able to tell that one is day and one is night. I used to know a blind kid, and his mother told me he can tell the difference in day and night. It wasn't any of those things. It just somehow he just knows it's night.
Huh.
But it is. But nevertheless, right, you're not really going to know the difference day and night unless you look at it. The medium by which you understand that this is day and this is night is through vision. You can't use a different medium to get the same understanding, right? The difference between Shabbos and the rest of the week is not a numbering system. There's a different reality to these two experiences. So much so that the Talmud says that when God offered the Torah to the Jewish people said to God, if we keep the Torah, what will you give us? And God says, that's a good question, right? So he says, I'll give you the Olam Haba, the next world. And the Almighty said, and so the Jewish people said, that's very nice, we really appreciate it, but no one ever came back to tell us, is it worth it? Maybe we'll get there. Really? This is it? Right? So God says, okay, I'll give you a taste of Olam Haba. What's the taste of Olam Haba?
Shabbat.
Shabbat. Right? So for a lot of people, it's not a taste of Olam Haba. They don't taste it. They don't sense it. Right? So it takes a little bit of an effort. Excuse me. Thank you. Right? But if you connect with it and you work in it and you do it, you play it right? It's a taste of Olam Haba. It's mind-boggling. Blow your way. Right? So that's Shabbat. That's the seventh day.
But how does that relate to the way that the Christians numbered and put it instead as a new chapter where it should have stayed with the previous chapter?
They should have. That's true. You see, it's important to appreciate that the early Christians, up until I believe like the 1600s, somewhere around there, most Christians, most non-Jews couldn't read the Bible. It wasn't in English. It was in Latin and Greek. And the first translators of the Bible were burnt at the stake as heretics, because they felt that if people could read the Bible, now they're talking about the New Testament, they wouldn't believe it, which is what happened. The end of Christianity really started with Enlightenment, when people could read the Bible. But the reason it's called the King James Version, that's the classic edition of the Bible that is in the non-Jewish world. It's called the King James Version. It's the earliest printing of the Bible. There was previous ones, but they were killed. So the one that became the standard edition that was used was the one commissioned by King James of England. And the reason why that was the one was stuck is because he was the king, and they couldn't kill the king. So they were stuck, right? So so they weren't reading it in the way that we read a Torah, with scrutiny, and more than one, quite a few actually, of converts that I've come across, because they were thrown out of Sunday school because they asked too many questions. Right? It was the whole basis of Christianity is not to ask questions, just accept whatever it says, and that didn't rub a lot of people. It just didn't work for them, and they got thrown out of Sunday school. I met a few. It's not a solitary experience, and so there are lots of problems with how they read and translate the Bible and understand it. They just don't make sense. This being one of them. All right, very good, very good.
So the chapter should have ended with Shabbat, and then after ending with Shabbat,
Yes.
you should have had a new chapter.
Right, whereas we got chapter 2, verse 4, should have been the new chapter.
Mhm.
And the Sefer Torah, in the Sefer Torah, there's no chapter and verses whatsoever. Right? And that's understandable because life doesn't have chapters and verses.
Mhm.
You know, there are stages, but where they actually start and where they actually end is a little fuzzy.
Ah,
So the Torah, which is or life, which is a reflection of the Torah, or Torah, which is a reflection of life, exemplifies that concept.
Torah's Chaim.
Torah's Chaim, right? Exactly. Very good. Very good.